Hi, it's Dan with EUJuicers.com, coming to you as always from our offices here in the heart of Europe. And in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about juicing apples. Specifically, I'm going to talk about different varieties, which varieties are good. Also some talk about if you grow your own apples, what to do when you're juicing. I'll talk about some tips and tricks that can make juicing a little easier and more effective. And then at the end, what I want to do is actually bring out 4 different juicers, each one representing one of the 4 major types, that being centrifugal juicer, a horizontal single auger slow juicer like this guy here, a vertical single auger slow juicer, and a twin gear juicer. But first of all, let's talk about different types of apples and what to look for. Now, we have a lot of customers who come in or write that grow their own apples. And whether you're growing your own or you're looking in the store, the biggest thing to remember is you want the firmest apples possible to get the best juice. Not only the highest yield, but the clearest juice. A lot of times people grow apples and it's either the variety, or perhaps they've been stored for a while, or they've been harvested late and they're overripe. Those overripe apples or softer apples are really difficult to juice in any juicer. A lot of times those kind of apples need a dedicated press, like a Norwalk machine or a Pure juicer. Those are those hydraulic machines. Basically, there's a first step that cuts up the apples into small bits. You put those into a bag, and then that hydraulic press squeezes it through the bag, and you get this really thick, sweet juice as a result. And again, those soft apples are best left for something like that, or as an additional ingredient to another juice that has a lot higher liquid content. But if you're in the store and looking at apples, what should you look for? Well, I was in the store this morning and I grabbed some of the most common apples I could find. There were a couple I want to mention first that I couldn't find that I wish I could bring in here because I'd like to test them. First is the Fuji apple. Fuji apple is a good all-around apple. It's really good for eating. It's good for juicing as well. It's got a nice balance of sweetness and tartness, which gives it a good kind of mix of flavors. The other one is something I've never seen. I've only read about, and I've been reading about it for years. You see, I'm here in Europe, and I don't think this variety is available in Europe, but it's the big thing in the US. This is the Honeycrisp apple. From what I've read is it's got a really good balance, even more than a Fuji, of sweetness and tartness, really firm flesh, really high juice content, although I hear they are very expensive. But I've read a few reports of people who say they make really good apple juice, if not the best. So if you've got experience with those Honeycrisp, could you leave a comment below? I would love to hear about it and your experiences, especially regarding juicing them. But with these 3 guys here, what did I find? Let's start out up front here, these pink guys. These are Gala apples. Gala apples are okay. They're kind of an overall okay apple. Okay for juicing, okay for eating. Mild apple, kind of average apple if you want to say. Sort of firm flesh, not real firm. You'll get a decent yield of juice. It's not very sweet, it's not very tart, but it's just a good kind of starter basic apple. Something good for recipes as well, if you don't want an overwhelming sweet taste. Next up, here's maybe the most common apple out there, the one you'd find in a lunchbox or something. This is a Red Delicious, called a Red Chief in some markets. And even though these are known as eating apples, these are actually pretty good for juicing. They're one of the sweetest apples out there. So if you're trying to get your kids to switch to juice, this is a good one to try because it will result in a kind of a dark brown from the skin there getting in the juice, a darker colored juice that's pretty sweet. Now, the drawback again is it's pretty high in sugar, so how much better is it than a soda? That's maybe something for you to research or for another video, but just keep that in mind. Some of these apples with a higher sugar content might not be the best. It may be better as an ingredient. Finally, I found my favorite apple for juicing. This is the Granny Smith apple. Granny Smiths, they're known for pies because they're tart. You know, people bake them in a pie, add a little sugar, but they're great for juicing. Really low sugar content, really high liquid content, and I find them especially good mixed with other produce, especially vegetables. Carrots, spinach, Granny Smith apple, that's a classic combo. Maybe throw a little ginger in there. The tartness of a Granny Smith apple really balances out the sweetness of things like carrots, and it also balances out that bitterness that you sometimes find in greens like kale or even sometimes in spinach. So for me, overall, the best apple out there to juice is the Granny Smith, for its yield, for its flavor, for its ability to blend with other ingredients. What I want to do next, talk a little bit about just a couple of tips for preparing apples and juicing apples. Now, the first thing I'd like to mention is make sure the apples are clean. If you're shopping in an organic market and you're sure that these are bio or organic quality, then they just need a quick rinsing. If it's like these guys, you're taking them out of a shop, you're going to want to wash them a little more thoroughly, just in case there's some chemical residue, some pesticides. You don't want to get that in the juice because you don't want to peel apples. Apples are best juiced with the peel on because there's a lot of nutrition there. Now be careful, especially with these Red Delicious. I don't know if you can see, but there's a slight waxy reflection. That's because oftentimes these apples are sprayed with a little bit of paraffin, a little bit of wax to keep them shiny, fresh looking, feeling a little firmer. You can wash it in really hot water. Sometimes that'll get rid of it. But generally, paraffin's neutral, so it's not a problem. It's just not something you want in your juice so much, flavor-wise maybe. So what you want to do is, in this shop, just kind of look. Sometimes you can find them without it. These have just a minimal amount. You can feel that maybe this doesn't have any, maybe it's just the skin. But sometimes you see them and they look like just glossy. Stay away from those real glossy ones. In terms of prepping the apples, you want to make sure the stems are gone. And the seeds, that's kind of a controversial thing. You know, apple seeds contain cyanide, same as like apricots and things like that. But it's a very trace amount. From what I've read, it takes anywhere from 150 to even 1,000 before it will even affect the body. That's seeds, not apples. So it would take quite a lot of apples to have any effect, but maybe better safe than sorry. Make sure the seeds, or most of them, are out of there. I think the easiest way to do that is just use a slicer, an apple slicer like this. This takes care of all the problems in one shot. You've got the apples in small enough pieces to fit in a juicer. You've got the stem gone. You've got the seeds, most of them gone, if not all. And it just, for me, makes it a lot easier. And you know, even with the wide mouth juicers that are kind of the rage these days, I'm talking things like the Kuvings wide mouth, the Omega MMV, things like that with the big trap door on top. And I would still say slice the apple before you put it in. First of all, a big apple's not going to fit even in those 78, 80 millimeter openings. These are just too big. And second, I think they just process better. You get a little better yield if you're putting smaller pieces in there rather than forcing the machine to kind of crush that whole thing. It just seems more effective that way. Besides that, you know, certain varieties of apples, they'll foam up a bit, makes the juice look maybe not quite so attractive. You can always strain that out. Just run it through a strainer or scoop it out with a spoon. And finally, keep in mind apples oxidize. They're one of the most oxidization prone fruits out there, which means as soon as you slice them, they'll start turning brown. So once you cut them, juice them. Don't cut them the night before and put them in a bowl. Don't think you can cover it and that's going to protect it. They'll still turn brown, which means the juice will be a little kind of sweeter, not so attractive looking. One tip to avoid that is, well, what you want to do is drink the juice immediately after you process it, once you make it. Don't let it sit in the fridge. It's going to turn brown, not so much with these slow juicers, but with a centrifugal juicer that's going high speed like a blender, and that's going to turn brown pretty fast. But one tip to avoid that, like I was saying, use a lemon. Now this is going to affect the flavor somewhat, but if you squeeze just half a lemon in there, you could peel it, throw it in the juicer, or just cut it in half and squeeze some in. The ascorbic acid in the lemon is going to actually really retard that browning action. In fact, sometimes when we make videos in the morning, I'm prepping the ingredients, and if I'm using apples in the recipe, I always squeeze a little lemon on there because it keeps them looking nice. Otherwise, by the time we film, they've turned brown, things like that. You can really see that in action actually in a video we filmed a couple of weeks ago. You can click on the link here if you want to check it out. We put some apples in a blender, and then we put some apples in a vacuum blender and poured them in a bottle, set them side by side, let them sit for about 5 minutes, and the difference was pretty crazy. The apples in the vacuum blender that weren't exposed to the air stayed pretty green looking. The other ones turned into this really brown mesh, just kind of like a mashy mess. And that's what you'd get in a centrifugal juicer. Speaking of which, I want to bring out the centrifugal juicer and the other three. So I'm going to arrange this and we'll take a look at juicing the apples in all these different juicers. So what I'm going to do is show each of these 4 juicers. We'll start with this guy, and I'll tell you a little bit about the pluses and minuses of each one in general and in relation to apples. And then I'll just show you how they juice, how it works. Won't do any detailed measurements, yield tests, pulp, any of that stuff. You can look at our more detailed videos for that. But starting with the centrifugal, this is the Videa CJ001. And the benefits of a centrifugal, well, they're the cheapest juicer by far. They're much less expensive than other types of juicers, and they're also the fastest. This thing will juice these apples probably in less than a minute. Real simple. They also have a wide opening, wide feeding tube, which is nice. On the downside, the juice quality isn't quite so good. The thing is, these are running so fast, you know, that it's just a spinning blade. It's chopping the fruit into small pieces, flinging them up against a wall, kind of like the way your spin dryer works at home, and extracting the juice that way. Also, like I talked about before, it can cause some oxidation, so the juice might start turning brown. We'll see after I juice it here. So what I'll do is just, I'm going to use Granny Smith for all of these, use 4 for each juicer. Use my slicer here, and just see how it goes in terms of speed, ease of use, things like that. Did I mention a disadvantage is these are loud also. It's not the thing you'll do in the middle of the night. Notice there's some foam, that's normal. It's going to be normal in any juicer most likely, more so usually in centrifugals. What I want to do is kind of divide this up. With everything else I'll make just 1 glass. But I want to see if that lemon makes a difference over time, because we'll be filming probably still for another 30 minutes. It'll give it a chance to oxidize. So here's the 2. And what I'm going to do is, yeah, this will affect the flavor, especially with Granny Smith. Now, lemon might be better with one of these guys, these sweeter ones. Just got a little lemon squeezer here. And this might be a little messy. These things are pretty cool. We use one of these at home for citrus. So that's just under half a lemon I squeezed in there. Gonna set these aside and bring out the next juicer, and at the end, let's compare. Let's see how they look, and we'll see how they taste. Next up is the single auger horizontal juicer. This is the Sauna 707, and single auger juicers are just general universal machines. It should do fine on apples. Yield might be slightly less than the next 2 I'm doing, but the quality should still be fine. It's a slow juicer compared to the centrifugal, which was the one we just did that was running about 10,000 RPM. These run about 60 RPM, which theoretically means less oxidation, less foam, higher quality juice, perhaps more yield. And also, this is the easiest juicer to clean of all 4. The centrifugal was probably the hardest because it has the biggest screen. And that's the typical part that takes the most time. You got to scrub the screen. The screen in this is real small, the one in the centrifugal is big. So I'll start slicing, and let's see how this one goes. One thing to note, the 707, most horizontals, well, not most, some come with 2 juicing screens, and one's a fine juicing screen with little tiny holes for firmer produce. One's a coarse screen with bigger holes for softer things. I'm using the fine screen here. If these were real soft apples, I'd probably switch to the coarse screen. I had one last piece of apple kind of not stuck, just sitting there. So what I did was reverse the motor, pulled it back, then went forward again. But this juicer worked fine. These horizontals work real easy with just about everything. And it'll clean up, like I said, real easy too. There's a bit of foam on the juice. Again, like I said, that's going to be the case with pretty much any juicer with Granny Smith apples. And again, the yield with something like these that are so high in liquid content, it's going to be similar among all 4 juicers. Probably the last one, that's the Angel, the twin gear, is going to have maybe 10% more. And the next one, which will be the vertical single auger, will have about 5 to 10% more as well compared to this. And this one will be very similar to the last one, the centrifugal juicer. But I don't know if you can see the color there. It's really uniform, looks nice. We'll see how they all look at the end, and we'll see how they taste at the end. So next up, the vertical. So next up is the vertical single auger juicer. This is the Sauna 828, Sauna's newest model. And you can click on the link here if you want to see a full review. Also, we'll put up another link where we compare this to the previous model here that I had here, the Sauna 707, just if you want to see more in depth the pros and cons of a vertical versus a horizontal juicer. But generally the results are going to be pretty similar to the last juicer, especially in terms of juice quality. Maybe slightly less pulp here, but again, Granny Smith apples don't give much pulp anyway. The yield should be a little higher here just because of the process that verticals use. I'm using a fine screen again with this model, again, because these apples are firm. And otherwise, anything to know about this? It has this kind of cool feeding tube, but I won't need that since I'm slicing the apples into small bits. I've also got the pulp control lever that you can set to either closed or half open. Half open I only recommend for softer things, so for apples I'm going to leave this fully closed. Otherwise, in terms of cleanup, pretty easy to clean, not so easy as the last one, the 707. Certainly easier though than the centrifugal. And speed is going to be maybe slightly slower than the previous model, the 707 that we just showed. But again, all of these are going to juice these apples in about 3 minutes or so. Alrighty, I'll start slicing and then juicing. Now verticals tend to be self-feeding, so probably I won't need to use the pusher, but we'll see. Or maybe I will, since these are sliced so small. Heavier pieces. Heavier pieces, especially things like carrots, will self-feed. Smaller bits of apple, maybe not. And notice that squeaky sound? That's unique to apples, especially Granny Smith with verticals. Not sure why, but they tend to squeak like that. One thing I do with this model, the 828, it has this, like I said, this pulp control lever. Just at the very end, I set it to half open. All that does is let more pulp come out more quickly. It basically reduces the back pressure. You don't want to leave that on all the time or there'll be less yield. So interesting, this is usually one of the quietest juicers we've tested, except with Granny Smith. Sometimes I'm making juice at lunch, which, like I said, Granny Smith apples, carrots, spinach, and I always have to close the door if I've got Granny Smith apples. Quality looks pretty similar to the last one. Clean this up, and let's bring the final juicer, the twin gear, out. And finally, the last juicer representing twin gear technology. This is the Angel juicer, and twin gears tend to have, in terms of pluses, the most yield, maybe the highest quality juice, because you've got these two gears pushing together really tightly, getting just the most out of the pulp. You'll see the pulp is the driest and the least amount of pulp at the end. On the other hand, they do tend to be pricey, a bit more complicated to clean because there's two gears and the screen's pretty small. But again, for apples, all the juicers are probably going to work just fine. Let's see how the Angel does. I'm also using the optional pusher. This has a silicone ring around it. The one that comes standard with the Angel doesn't. Probably don't need it for this. Angels will back up with some things like carrots if you go too fast. With these apples, again, with such a high water content, shouldn't be a problem. So one thing with the Angel, I noticed there, I was getting a little lazy putting a couple of these apple slices in at once. It was taking a lot of effort to get those things through there. If you just feed them one piece at a time, it was no problem. They went through smoothly. That being said, it was probably the most effort of all the 4 juicers to juice, just because there was definite pushing involved where there wasn't really with any of the others. And what I'll do now is go get the other juices, we'll line them up, compare them, give it a taste, see if I notice any difference. So I'll be right back after I clean this up. I've got all the juices here lined up. Notice 2 of these aren't like the other. Wonder which juicer they came from. What we've got here is the 2 from the centrifugal juicer, the one where I added the lemon, the one without the lemon. Here's the 707, that's the horizontal single auger. Here's the 828, the vertical single auger, and the one we just did, the Angel, the twin gear. Notice, besides even looking at those guys, these 3, it gets a bit brighter to darker. That doesn't necessarily reflect the juicing technology as it reflects the time. These were done before this one. Apples will generally start turning brown a bit. However, I wasn't right on that assessment with the centrifugal because they separated so much. Granny Smith does have a lot of vitamin C which will retard it, but you'll notice not much of a difference between the one where I added the half a lemon and the one without. Really, the centrifugal can't break up the particles nearly so effectively, so it just separates into kind of water with bits of fiber here, whereas these are far more consistent. So you can really clearly see the difference between a fast juicer, high speed, and a slow juicer. And I guess what I'll do is taste them, see if I notice any difference. It's like drinking bubble tea or pond water or something. But you know what? Even if it looks kind of strange, even more so now, it actually tastes pretty good. It tastes just like good apple juice. Yeah, you can definitely tell that one's got a lemon. It's got a kick to it. Normally Granny Smith are pretty tart, and drinking it straight can be a bit lip puckering, but not in this case. These are a little sweeter. Huge difference going from those guys to this. Just a lot smoother on the horizontal. Really similar flavor between these 2. Strangely enough, that's the twin, the Angel. Doesn't have quite the intense apple flavor as these. I'm not sure why, but these are all pretty similar, and in a blind test I probably couldn't tell them apart, but I sure as heck could tell these 2 from those 3 with my eyes closed. And that'll wrap it up. Hope you liked this video. If you have any comments, please leave them below. If you have any ideas for videos, leave them below. And like I said, if you have any experience with Honey Crisp apples, I would love to hear about it. Please write that below. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan with EUJuicers.com, and I'll see you next time.